Hello and welcome back to the channel, and today I'm going to be talking about Kamen Rider Zi-O. And Zi-O is a fun season, but it just has a lot of problems, probably the most problems besides Gotchard. And I recently rewatched it, so in this video I'll be talking about my thoughts on Kamen Rider Zi-O. So first I'm going to talk about what I thought of Zi-O after I first watched it, and I had a fun time, but it definitely had a lot of problems, and it definitely didn't leave me off with the best note because I thought the ending was really unsatisfying, especially because we got a universe reset with Build, which was only a season before, so it just felt really lame. It was fun, it was cool to see all the past actors back, but over time, the more I thought about it, the less I liked it, and for the longest time, it was my least favorite season besides Hibiki, and Hibiki was only my least favorite season just because I never really saw all of it, so Zi-O was my de facto least favorite season for a really long time. So after a rewatch, my opinion on the season hasn't really changed. It's a fun season, but as soon as you start thinking about the logistics of it, it just falls apart. And not to mention that I feel like the anniversary aspect kind of hinders it a bit. It's not really the best, but I'll talk about that later. But also just the fact that I feel like anniversary stuff has just been saturated to hell and back at this point. Even when I saw Zi-O for the first time, I saw all 4 superhero Tyson movies, and 2 of those are basically only focused on Kamen Rider characters. And then you also have Superhero Senki that came out later. And even in the Heisei Generations movies, you had past actors returning. And not to mention all the anniversary stuff in Sentai. So I'm just sick of anniversary stuff at this point, and the anniversary stuff in the season isn't even done that well. But when it focuses on the story, the original story that it's telling, it's interesting, but if you think about it at all, it just starts to fall apart. But if you don't, it's a lot of fun. So now I'm going to talk about the characters, and they aren't the greatest in this season, although they aren't too bad. Sogo is a fine protagonist. He's definitely the type of protagonist I don't like, where he's a modern typewriter who's more of an eccentric special boy. But he isn't too unbearable, although in the O's tribute he was really, really annoying. But other than that, he's fine. He's comparable to Takaru, and he's been taken seriously, so that's all that really matters. His thing about becoming king is kind of stupid, but it's a modern Toku protagonist, so they kind of have to have these weird quirks. And also, Swartz gave him that idea, if I'm remembering correctly, so there's at least a story reason for that. I think the worst part about his character, though, is that he just never feels like he could become evil Zi-O that Gates and Tsukiyomi are fighting in the future. I feel like if he showed some glimpses of that, it would make his path to become a good Demon King more interesting, but the fact that he's just a perfect writer protagonist from the very beginning is just really lame. Gates is a pretty generic secondary writer who's antagonistic towards the protagonist, but eventually becomes their friend. And with Gates, I don't really mind this arc for him. It makes sense, and it doesn't take the entire season, so he's alright, but he's not that great. Tsukiyomi is a pretty boring character. She has her backstory as the sister to Swartz, which is interesting, but I feel like not that much is done with it. And then the penultimate episode, when she becomes Kamen Rider Tsukiyomi, she doesn't even really get to fight, so that's just lame. She does get to fight in the movies, but it's just lame she never got to fight in the show. And she's just boring. Waz is my favorite character in this season, although even he isn't that great. It is mentioned that he was Gates and Tsukiyomi's commander in the future, but it's really only brought up in one episode and then never mentioned after that. And it's never revealed why he joined Zi-O, which seems like a pretty big oversight considering that's his entire character. But other than that, he's fun and charismatic, and I like him a lot more than White Waz, so he's my favorite character in the season. Now I'm going to talk about the villains, and they're not that good. The Time Jackers just make no sense to me. I don't really get their motivation for wanting to insert a new king instead of Zi-O. And Swartz is the only Time Jacker that matters, and he wants to be king anyway. And also, it doesn't really make any sense why Swartz would have to influence Sogo in the past to want to become Zi-O, because I feel like Swartz could just take the rider powers by force, because isn't that what Zi-O did anyway? And then the stuff with another Zi-O was such a waste of potential. I feel like it could have been a lot cooler than it actually did. And then Zi-O was the biggest waste of all, and I feel like just that he doesn't show up enough, and he's really just the main motivation for Gates and Tsukiyomi. And I just feel like if Sogo showed more characteristics of becoming Zi-O, then it would have worked a lot better, but it just doesn't. Also, I like the idea of White Waz. I just don't really understand him that much. Why would he cross over timelines if his Gates already killed Zi-O? It just doesn't really make any sense to me. Obviously, his reason for coming is to bring over the Waz powers. And also, his tablet is just OP and it's never used to its full potential, but I'll talk about that later. Now I'm going to talk about the world building, and this is probably the biggest problem of the season. It's just that the time travel rules are never explained, and it kind of just does whatever the writers need. And it doesn't help that the Kamen Rider timeline as a whole has never really been established. Just writers show up whenever, and they're connected kind of whenever the writers need it to. So that just hurts in a season about time travel. And then it doesn't really make any sense how all of them exist in the same timeline, because you have things like Ryuki, where in the ending the world is reset and the mirror monsters don't exist, but for some reason they exist in Zi-O now. And then with Build and the Skywall, and then even them reset the timeline, but when they go back in 2017 in the show, there's no Skywall, so it doesn't really make any sense. And that's probably the biggest problem with this season. But I'm sure the target audience of the show doesn't care about the semantics of time travel and stuff. So as long as you don't think about it, it honestly is fine. So another weird thing is that throughout the entire show, it's presented as if all of these events are happening on the same exact timeline. But then near the end, Schwartz is trying to combine all the Rider worlds into one. So it was a parallel universe story the entire time. And that's just kind of weird, because I feel like that would have made a lot more sense, even if it was retreading what Decade did. But that would have been fine. It would have made more sense, but they just kind of didn't do that, and then they just did in the ending. I feel like another big waste of potential of this season is the future writers. I feel like they could have been the main hook of this season instead of the anniversary aspect, but as it is now, they're pretty much just around to give Waz power-ups, and that's just really lame. Another annoying thing about this season is that there are overpowered abilities by the characters that just aren't used, and it's just confusing because there are never limits given to these abilities. I feel like the biggest culprit of this is White Waz's tablet, where whatever he writes in it, it happens, but he really only uses it to get people to fight each other. And I feel like he should have just written Gates becomes Gates Revive, and then his entire story's finished, but it's never used like that. And then DN takes it, and then it's never used until Gates Majesty, so that's just stupid. And then another one is Zi-O gets the ability to see into the future with Zi-O 2, and he uses it a couple times after he gets Zi-O 2 for the first time, and then never uses it again, even though it probably would have been pretty useful. And then also in the Kamen Rider Kikai episodes, it's revealed that he can unconsciously create the future, and then this is just brushed aside, and that's a really cool ability. Why is it never used ever again? And then lastly, the Time Jacker's power to freeze time. They can just freeze time and then walk up and kill people, which is what Aura does to Schwartz in the final episode. Obviously it doesn't work, but they just never do this. But obviously I know why all these things aren't used. It's because the season has to be 50 episodes long, and if they did this, it would be over so fast. But if that's the case, then they have to give limits to these powers or explain why they can't do it, or else it just won't make any sense. I will say, however, the final fight where Sogo becomes Zi-O is one of the coolest fights in any Rider season, and it's just so cool. But the ending where he just resets the timeline is just kind of lame. It just doesn't really feel earned and just anticlimactic after such a cool fight. Another huge problem with the season is the anniversary aspect, and that really hurts a season that is an anniversary season, when it feels like the anniversary aspect drags down the original story. And I feel like that's what happened with Zi-O. And to me, the anniversary stuff feels a lot like Kingdom Hearts, where you have all the Disney characters, but only 3 of them are important to the story. And that's what it feels like with Zi-O. Just replaces Disney characters with past writers, where it really only feels like Decade is the only important character. Even DN doesn't really need to be there. And just the tribute episodes themselves, Like, they don't even revolve around the writers for the most part. They're mostly just civilian of the week episodes, and then a past actor just happens to be there, and really just feels like fan service. And then even the episodes that do revolve around the writers, like their Yuki Hibiki played and Kabuto tributes, they just feel like shallow fan service. And the only tribute episode I would say is good is the Agito one, because it feels like Shoichi is teaching the heroes a lesson, and he can relate to Tsukiyomi as they both had amnesia, and that's just cool. That's the only tribute episode I would say actually works for me. And not to mention, Double, Kuga, and Drive didn't even get their own tribute episodes. If you count the movies, they technically did, but for Double, his Rewatch appeared in Heisei Generations Forever, and that's basically it. Kuga had barely an appearance in Heisei Generations Forever, and then Drive characters show up in the Overquarter movie, but it's not that important. And then Chase shows up near the end, and that's pretty much it. So it just sucks that those seasons never even got their own tribute episodes, because they're some of my favorites. But even so, it's always cool to see past actors return, even here when a lot of them get to transform into their writers again, and that's just always cool. So now I'm going to talk about the movies, and first is Heisei Generations Forever. This is the worst Kamen Rider movie I've ever seen for like 90% of it, and then the final 30 minutes are just the greatest thing I've ever seen. It's such a crazy contrast. So if you ever want to watch this movie, just watch the final 30 minutes. And that's it, because the other part of the movie is absolutely terrible. Next is the summer movie, Overquarter, and it's a lot better than Heisei Generations Forever. It feels a little bit disjointed with two subplots, where one is about the characters going back in time to the Sengoku era to save the Drive characters, and it has a parallel to the second part where Gates becomes Nobunaga's Kagemusha, and then it turns out Sogo is a Kagemusha for another character, which would have been really interesting, but the movie is not canon, so it doesn't really matter. And even if it was canon, it would be kind of lame to have this big reveal in the movie and it be resolved in the movie also. So I'm glad it's not canon. It at least brings some interesting idea that Sogo was never actually Omagio, so that's interesting, but it's not canon. But either way, it's a quality movie. The last movie is Gates Majesty, and this is the best Zi-O movie in my opinion. I thought at first it would be White Waz's timeline where he makes Gates become Gates revive and then kill Omagio, but it actually happens in Sogo's new restored timeline, which is kind of lame, but it doesn't really matter. And it's a pretty good movie. Like the season itself, the cameos are mostly misses, with the only one I care about being Kamen Rider Axel. Like Agito with the show, he actually teaches Gates something, and all the other ones are kind of just there, just to be there. Really, the only other problem I had with it is that I thought White Waz died at the end of Zi-O, so him coming back kind of didn't make any sense. And he kind of just gives this hand-wavy answer that Swartz put him in a parallel universe or whatever the hell that means. I do like that he becomes evil and wanted to become the savior himself because Gates allied himself with Zi-O. That just seems in character with White Waz, because all he wanted to do was kill Omagio. So that's cool. So it's a good movie. It's probably on par with Overquarter, but I like it a little bit more. Now I'm going to talk about the aesthetics, and they're pretty good. I like how they're different from the norm, where their visor are characters instead of just eyes. I think that's cool. And all the main riders' suits are pretty cool. I don't really like the color scheme on Waz, but that's whatever. Zi-O 2 looks pretty good. Zi-O Trinity looks really ugly. I hate it. It's probably one of my least favorite looking rider suits. And then Grand Zi-O looks better than I remember. And then the music is pretty good. The opening theme is really good. And then Next to World is a really good insert theme. So pretty good music overall. So in conclusion, Zi-O is a mess, but it's an enjoyable mess. It's always cool to see past actors return, even if it's not exactly the most satisfying. Superficially, it's always cool. The original storyline is pretty cool, although thinking about it in any capacity really makes it fall apart. So you really have to just turn your brain off to enjoy the season. and if you do that, it's a lot of fun. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope it didn't come off as too cynical. It's still a kid show at the end of the day, so it doesn't have to be perfect. But for this show especially, you really have to not think about it in order to enjoy it. And I still had fun with it, despite all my things I had to say about it. Both times I watched it, I had fun. And I'm just glad Gotchard is so bad that this doesn't have to be my least favorite season anymore, because I never thought it was bad. So after Gotchard's finale airs at the end of this week, I'll make a video on it. And then next week I'll make my tier ranking on the Sentai Extra Heroes, and I'll probably take a break for a while. Maybe make a reaction to the Gav premiere if I like it. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Feedback is always appreciated. Have a great day.